Thank you for watching Rachel and Ralph's Reality Check, where us two insiders give you the inside scoop on what's really going on in politics. I am here with Ralph Benko. He is a weekly columnist for Newsmax, co-author of the Capitalist Manifesto, and co-founder and chair of the 180,000 Facebook group Capitalist League. And you all know me, a longtime contributor to Townhall and the founder and editor of Intellectual Conservative. So this week, we are going to talk about a column I recently wrote on how Democrats are becoming the party of the elderly, while Republicans are becoming the party of young people. And then we're going to talk about Ralph's column, which is some big news. Biden looks like he likes capitalism, and he's going with a sort of Democrat capitalism versus socialist. And finally, we'll wrap it up with our blue collar blues segment, some outreach that Biden has been doing to blue collar people lately. Okay, so to begin with, I wrote this article because my lefty friend keeps telling me that your party is the party of the old blue-haired people, and you guys are all being left in the dust, while all the young people who now control the country, they're all left-wing, and your party is just so dated with its views that nobody pays attention to anymore. So I decided that I would actually dig into it a little bit and see how accurate he was. And as usual, when I research a lot of strange things the left says, he was wrong. Basically, the tide is turning. One poll, very recent poll, found that there are now more Democrat baby boomers than Republican baby boomers. Other polls found that when you look at TV stations like Fox News versus MSNBC, CNN, the ones more on the left, Fox News has a larger percentage of young people watching than it does older people. Whereas these more left-leaning networks, especially NBC, that was about the worst one. They have something like 4% of their young people watch, whereas they have these huge percentages for older people. And CBS, NBC, ABC, their average median age is at 60. So, and the younger generation has gotten even more conservative in some ways than like, say, my generation X or even the 1980s young people. Those percentages are even higher, and especially the ones that consider themselves far right are even higher. And I believe that is because of the polarization that's going on. I think the left has just driven people crazy, to the right. I think these young millennials and these new Zoomers, Generation Z, they are sick and tired of being canceled. Everybody knows someone who has been canceled by the left. It's a much more vicious era than when I was growing up. So what do you say to all of this, Ralph?
Well, I'm a little nervous. You're making me a little nervous, Rachel, because that great conservative Frenchman, Georges Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France, was one of his aides broke into his office and said, "Oh, Monsieur Prime Minister, I have hideous news for you. Your son has joined the Communist Party." And Clemenceau said, "Sir, my son is 21 years old. If he had not joined the Communist Party, I would have disowned him. If he is still a communist when he's 30, I will disown him then." So, I kind of always kind of fancied having the youth being sort of radical left and then growing out of it. So if they are if they are disappointing me that way and they're becoming conservative while youthful, I'm just gonna have to scratch my head and say, how do we cure them of that? How do we make them into romantic utopians when they are young and foolish, with the idea that they will actually grow out of it once they gain a bit of life experience and maturity? So I understand, I appreciate, I'm touched by your enthusiasm for the millennials and the Zoomers beginning to lean right, but I kind of liked it when they were leaning left. if they were not joining the Communist Party when they were 21, I would have disowned them. So
Well,
said Clemenceau.
well, are you biased? I mean, were you on the left when you were a lot younger?
Of course I was. And there's another famous story saying that someone who's not on the left when they are in their youth has no heart, and someone who's not on the right when they mature has no brain. So I kind of, I have a certain kind of admiration for the young people who are, who decide to join the left, even though it's, it's silly. I know it's silly, but the fact is that it's a phase that I think it's healthy for them to go through. Nevertheless, you wrote a great column at Townhall talking about how the youth are beginning to lean more and more right. And Rachel, I think you nailed the key point, which is the whole concept of woke culture and cancel culture is really anathema. That's not a left thing. That's a totalitarian thing. That is a thing that people's ability to, express their real feelings, however silly they might be, or however legitimate they might be. And so, frankly, I've been reading quite a few articles that indicate that there are the whole radical wokeism is obnoxious, and even people on the left uh, tend to feel that it's obnoxious, particularly proletarians, blue collar people like me. They're like, hey, what we want to do is we want to advocate for opportunity for working people, for the proletariat, for blue collars, so they can work their way up to a bourgeois or middle or comfortable middle class prosperity. That's the kind of ethos that I really love. When it gets down to canceling people, when it gets down to creating newspeak, as George Orwell would have put it, that makes certain kind of ideas completely unacceptable, that is just neo-totalitarianism. That's not leftism. That's obnoxious. And frankly, I would understand why the young people find that to be just unbearable. I own a few young people of my own, and I have good reason to believe that they think that's to say I'm the father of four brilliant children, and given the back channel inputs I get from them, I think that they're like, hey, that is not our idea of leftism, wokeism, and cancel culture. That's obnoxious. That's totalitarian. That's not leftism.
Well, you brought up something that I have to quibble with, and that's that old saying, if you're not a leftist in your youth, then you have no heart, and if you're not conservative when you're older, then you have no brains. I don't like that because there are a lot of people like myself who are raised with the most generous, kindest parents to ever walk the face of the earth. And there is no way any of us four children were ever going to turn out on the left with our parents being such activist conservatives who devote their lives to helping people. Like, I literally grew up thinking that was normal, that all we do several times a week is go to nursing homes and sing to people and go give people food baskets, and the list goes on. I mean, that to me was normal. So there was no way we turned out any other way. Now, I do admit I wish I would have had the experience to have been on the left, and so I could look back and see what it was like to think that way. My dad had that experience because he was a leftist when he was younger. He supported, was it Eugene McCarthy for president in 1972 when everybody else was supporting Nixon? My mom brought him around, I think, and she had both of them become born again Christians, and so that influenced them from then on out. But I just don't agree that being a leftist when you're young means you are the one with a heart. I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And the way I'm raised, capitalism doesn't work unless it has Christianity to temper it. And you, Ralph, are the only person I have ever known who is able to put out an argument in favor of capitalism that doesn't necessarily need Christianity as much. You were actually able to say it coherently, and I'm not even going to try to get into it. And if you want to go ahead and give a brief explanation, that's fine. Otherwise, we can move on to your article.
Thank you, and that's a great pivot point to my article. Last week I was talking about how the Washington Post, the official paper of the center-left Washington conspiracy / establishment, came out, the editorial board, saying that democratic capitalism was for all of its faults, and it's not perfect, and I'm not claiming that it is, has proven to be over time the best way of creating widespread prosperity of any system ever tried. And I'm like, what? And then they went on to say, try to get rich is not only natural, but it's laudable, because you have when you do that, you have benefits that spill over and benefit the whole rest of society. And it's like, pinch me, I'm dreaming. And that was the topic of my of my column in Newsmax last week, talking about how the Washington Post has enthusiastically endorsed capitalism. Where's my Pulitzer, dude? Democratic capitalism. And then I actually did a little reprise pointing out how John F. Kennedy was his persistent theme was cut the top tax rate, which was then 91%, dramatically. In his case, he talked about dropping into 70%, because the rising tide lifts all the boats. A rising tide lifts all the boats. And then he was martyred by Lee Harvey Oswald, and Lyndon Johnson, in fact, followed through on his promise and cut the top marginal income tax rate from 91 to 70%, and the economy took off. And that was Democrats. And then we went on to then we went on to the horror stories of Nixon, Ford, and Carter. So we're being a little bipartisan here, all of which created stagflation. And then came along Reagan, and not only did he adopt Jack Kemp's tax rate cut, 30% across the board, federal income tax rate cut, but the Democrats of their era, Dan Rostenkowski, Chicago Democrat, Bill Bradley, famous basketball star and senator from New Jersey, and Dick Gephardt, member of the House Democratic leadership, dropped the top tax rate. They were the ones who pushed to not just cut tax rates across the board, but to drop the top tax rate from 70 to 50 to 28%. That came out of the Democratic Party. And even Jimmy Carter, who was a nincompoop when it came to taxes and when it came to monetary policy, he was Mr. Deregulation. Even though he was a Southern Baptist, he started the process to deregulate beer. We used to have 3 different brands of beers, Bud and Coors and, like one other, I can't remember what. And now we have thousands of artisanal beers all over the country. We've got the beer renaissance, thanks in large measure to Jimmy Carter. So, and then you had Bill Clinton come along and cut the capital gains rate dramatically. So there's a lot of democratic capitalism going on out there, and we should just get off of the science fiction that Republicans are the ones who are the supply siders and Democrats are the ones who are the socialists. No, a lot of our prosperity has come from democratic capitalism, which now, just to frost the cake, Joe Biden is now exalting democratic capitalism. And by the way, it's not all talk and no action. He came out with his executive order about a month ago, and he has some really great supply side stuff in there. Now, he's got some bad ideas too, like getting rid of the step up in basis at death, which would be horrible for the economy. But I don't think he really means that. I think he's just using that as a feint to keep his lunatic fringe AOC and Bernie Sanders on the reservation by paying lip service to some of these really bad ideas. But he avoided, excuse me, he avoided Liz Warren's wealth tax. How great is that? Okay, and he has come out for an anti-non-compete provision, which is one of the things that most of the most of the big thinkers I know about say the reason that Silicon Valley has become the engine of innovation and the engine of of wealth and the engine of creating some of the most successful companies of the world. Rachel, I know you hate successful companies like Google and Facebook and Apple and stuff like that, but you know what? That's capitalism at its best. And
hate them because they're successful.
I'm sorry?
I don't hate them because they're successful.
Well, I don't know why you hate them, but
you know, they don't treat people equally. They censor conservatives, and they treat us the same way they would treat like child molesters. You know, they try to ban us, and you know, we end up in horrible stories as if we're just evil people for like telling a political joke.
Well, that's not the that is not the platforms, Rachel. That is the maniacs who live on the platforms, the trolls who are you know who are posting their own content, and thanks to the wonderful section, the wonderful pro free speech section of the Digital Millennial Copyright Act, Section 230, that allows the platforms not to be held liable for what the trolls and the idiots post on their platforms.
Yeah, but what they do is they go and they ban conservatives merely for conservative speech. That is editorializing. That is choosing what you can or can't say. They are acting like media companies, and I know you and I disagree about this. I just don't see why they should be above the law, and you're unable to sue them for libel when anybody can go sue little old me for libel. They can sue you for libel. So why are these big companies exempt from lawsuits when the rest of little Americans aren't?
Because they are not exempt from lawsuits. They're exempt from having their contributors who are not them. You know, look, I've got 180,000 followers worldwide for my extremely conservative capitalist league on Facebook, and Facebook has given me no pushback on that. Heritage Foundation, which is the gold standard of conservatism, at least it's the gold standard of boring conservatism, okay, has 2 million followers on Facebook, and I'm trying to remember even to the right of me and even to the right of Heritage, I think it's called it's one of the judicial conservative groups, has 7 million followers on Facebook. As long as you follow their rules about avoiding hate speech, then you're perfectly fine on social media.
Facebook destroyed right-wing news. You know that story, right? I used to write for right-wing news. It's gone. There's nothing on it. It's a shell of a website. John Hawkins, who owns it, said he shut it down because of what Facebook did to him.
Well, that's his story. But I just know tons and tons of conservatives who know how to advance and by the way, Mark Zuckerberg is very clear about this. He wants ideological diversity. There are limits, just like there are limits to free speech. You know, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. Okay, and Facebook has its limits too. The limits are very clearly posted on their website. If you just go to the Facebook terms of service and figure out where they define hate speech, and they're a private company, they can make their own definition of hate speech, even if I disagree with it. Okay, and I think that
you think it's okay for Facebook to do all this censorship of conservatives, which Project Veritas has exposed, because they've got inside conversations that went on Facebook talking about how people like Candace Owens are put on blacklists and things like that. You're perfectly fine with all that.
Well, first of all, it's not censorship unless the government does it. They're curating their standards, which you have to do. Otherwise, you get entities like 4chan or 8chan, which becomes absolute cesspools of trolling. And so They simply want, look, it's kind of like the MPAA. You've got G-rated, PG-rated, you have R-rated, and NC-17 rated. Facebook wants to keep its content clean. It does not want NC-17, whether that's violence or whether that's sex. And so they are just like, okay, we want to keep things G-rated on Facebook because that's good for business.
And Democrat leaning.
I'm sorry?
And Democrat leaning. Got to be Democrat leaning or Facebook might ban you.
Well, I'm not Democrat leaning. I'm embarrassingly enough Republican leaning, and I've never gotten the least pushback from Facebook either on my personal page.
How do you know it's not coming? You might be okay right now, but they might decide they want to target you in the future.
Maybe, but they've thrown a lot of commies off of their platform too. They've thrown a lot of left-wingers off of their platform. And if you actually read the literature on the left, as I do, because I like to keep on top of my enemy's playbook, they think that the Facebook people are fascist libertarians, if you can be such a thing, because they keep throwing their extreme leftists off the platform. So I'm just like,
it's 19-1. I just read an article recently. The big tech social media censors conservatives versus liberals 19-1.
Well, that's, I'm guessing that is some extremist right-wing group like your buddy Alex Jones or Breitbart.
Actually put out that article I read, which I think I linked to one of my recent columns. That was put out by a left-wing columnist, like in the tech industry, who did the research. So that's not a biased number.
Yes, it is a biased number because there's nothing but bias out there. We just need to be honest about our bias. That said, I let me just segue back to Joe Biden, Democratic capitalist again. I want our legions of readers to pay attention to the fact that the establishment Democrats are leaning harder and harder toward capitalism, toward free markets, at least rhetorically. Now, we may disagree. I disagree with their antitrust efforts, okay? But let's hold them up to their own, they're singing from our hymnal, and we should be celebrating that, and we should be using it to put pressure to open the Overton window to make capitalism the legitimate, the various flavors of capitalism, because there are various flavors of capitalism. There is social democracy, like you've got in the super capitalist Nordic states like Denmark. And then you've got laissez-faire capitalism, like you've got in places like Singapore. And then you've got the United States of America somewhere in between. We should be leaning on this and saying democratic capitalism is not just the most legitimate, but it's the best economic system ever tried. And even the establishment Democrats are now coming around to agree with that, like President Joe Biden. So hooray, Joe. And I would like us to be paying, I would like us to be paying, to be giving him props for that, and then putting a little pressure on him when we think that he is, in terms of his policies, coming up with not living up to the democratic capitalist standard that he has been championing. It's like, yay, go Joe, more democratic capitalism, no democratic socialism. You're our guy.
Well, I think he's just giving capitalism lip service. There's some political agenda behind it. I don't think we're actually going to see much. He's just going to use it to score points here and there where he needs to. And, he's promoting capitalism 1%, whereas there's a bunch of Republicans promoting it 99% more than he is. So I just don't see it in all these rosy terms like you do. I think it's just a very tiny little grasping.
Rachel, according to the data, and I hate to use the unfair tactic of using actual facts in an argument with you, but Donald Trump had the worst record of GDP growth of the last 7 presidents. So if you want to tell me that there are Republicans out there who are pushing a better capitalist package than Joe Biden.
That is the worst economic devastation since the Great Depression to deal with.
Yes, and look, I'm sorry, but even before COVID hit, the Donald Trump GDP growth record was punk. It was pathetic. And so it was, even though all of my old supply side buddies have been cheering him on, okay, if you actually look at the numbers, it was worse than Obama. Okay, the economic growth even before COVID hit was worse than Obama's. So I'm just saying, you give me the names of some Republicans who are pushing uh, a higher octane capitalism than Joe Biden. Hey, I will give them, I will sprinkle ticker tape on them. I will give them a ticker tape parade. But you know what? The Republicans are, and look, I didn't vote for Biden, so don't get me wrong. I voted for my fiance and life partner, who's clearly the best qualified person to run America. Okay, so I'm not a Bidenista, but I'm just saying the Republicans have been a bitter disappointment. I want to push them to embrace capitalism more than Joe Biden. But right now, you may, you know, you may, uh, you may applaud them, but name me one who is coming up with a really great supply side formula that is designed to produce equitable prosperity and economic growth. I'm with you, but I'm not seeing it.
Well, if GDP for Trump was worse than Obama before COVID, then would you say that is because of specific things on Trump's agenda that he pushed, or was that because Trump
Yeah,
did the things
yes,
Democrats
yeah.
want?
He had a bunch of really bad policies like his tariffs and stuff. Okay, his
Most
tax
of them go through.
he managed he applied a lot of tariffs, but we ended up doing more trade with China than before he came on the scene.
Right.
Okay, his economic policy was all hat and no cattle, and when even his tax cuts, which I supported, generally speaking, were more for the rich than they were for us. You know, they were more for the Thurston Howell the thirds and Loveys than they were for us Gilligans and Marriotts. So I'm just like the Jack Kemp, Ronald Reagan tax cuts were across the board. They were for everybody. Okay, and then you had George Bush, and then George W. Bush, and then you had Donald Trump, and somehow or other the tax cuts that they were pushing somehow managed to be, managed to end up in the laps of big business, big corporations, and rich folks. So I'm like, hey, that's not my brand of 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 capitalism of supply side economics. So I don't really. It's hard for me to get really pumped up and enthusiastic about something that is helping the rich get richer, but not really helping me very much, other than by what the Democrats like to call trickle down, which was not the Ronald Reagan form. Ronald Reagan, it was for everybody. It was not just, it did not privilege Thurston and Lovey. It was across the board.
Well,
But
I get
there's a there's the politics of this. So I want you to pivot to Joe Biden's, blue collar strategy as soon as you get finished tearing me limb from limb.
my last word is there always are going to be things you can criticize about whatever Republican politician. You know, we could sit here and pick Reagan apart for everything we didn't like about him.
I
But
never did that. I never did that. That's a straw man. Okay. I worked, I loved Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan made me a Republican. I went to work for Ronald Reagan in the Ronald Reagan White House. I'm proud of Ronald Reagan. Was he perfect? No, he was just the best president of my life. So don't pick on Ronald Reagan around me, or you'll, uh, you know, or you're going to get a lot of pushback, darling.
okay, we can agree on that one because I don't like to criticize him either. Okay, so our last segment is basically about how Biden is now taking all these trips to blue collar areas. He's obviously doing some, reaching out with 2024 in mind. Is that the impression you're getting, Ralph?
Absolutely. And the White House, the Biden White House, is not really making much of a secret out of it. They are focusing in on the blue collar industrial voters, and frankly, both in rhetoric and in symbolism, in terms of where he's going, in terms of where he's giving speeches, and in terms of the policies that he is pushing. Not all of which do I agree with, but I love the fact that he is uh, uh, focusing in on working people rather than the country club Republicans, who frankly I can, you know, I can I can barely tolerate the country club Republicans. I'd much rather be drinking Budweiser in an American Legion hall with my fellow proletarians than I would be sitting with you in the country club with all the fancy pants country club Republicans.
Well, it's so odd how you keep bringing up Thurston Howell and country club Republicans, because I hear this all the time when I read the mainstream media. They're always talking about how Trump and the Republicans are trying to give tax breaks for the rich and, blah, 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 blah. But, when I go and actually crunch the numbers and look at the comparisons, I always find so much more handouts for the rich coming from the Democrats. I wrote an article about that a couple years ago, and maybe I need to update it, because it seems like, there's this reputation out there that the Republicans care about the rich. But when you look at like big corporations, especially, I mean, the Democrats are the kings of giving tax breaks and special advantages to big corporations. Even lefty Seattle turned around and backed out of a huge corporate subsidy it was going to give Amazon, that the Democrats had put in place for Amazon, because there was just so much anger and outcry over it.
Well, Rachel, you're making an excellent point. And the fact is that the establishment Democratic Party has become very, very influenced by its lunatic fringe progressives who do not understand economics. And so, as it turns out, the Democrats have become a very, very as establishment have become a very, very crony-ish party who loves passing out subsidies to big business, which I find reprehensible. The fact that the Republicans do it worse is, well, there's an old saying: there are two parties in this country. There's the evil party, that's the Democrats, and the stupid party, that's the Republicans. So I am an embarrassed card-carrying member of the stupid party. But the fact is that the Democrats are rapidly becoming the party of the pampered elites, the professionals, the lawyers, the public school teachers, and the academics. And there's more and more evidence that the Democrats are losing touch with their working class roots, which is reprehensible, but another good reason to give for you, Rachel Alexander, to be giving Joe Biden props for attempting to force his party to reestablish their connection with their proletarian, blue-collar worker, industrial worker roots, which I think is marvelous that he's doing. Even you can dismiss it as politics, but you know what? It's the right thing to do. I wish him great success in that, and I hope the Republicans come out there and steal his lunch, because there are a number of Republicans like Steve Monasteri over there in Texas who get it, who absolutely get it, and are reaching out. There are actually three kinds of leftists. Two of them are conservatives, and one of them are progressives. So you've got the woke left, who are progressives, who are essentially totalitarian, okay? But the ethnic left, the blacks, the Latinos, and the Asians are very conservative. And the working class left, the blue collar left, are very conservative, and they are moving toward the Republican Party because the rank and file Republicans speak their language. And I wish we had a leader who was pushing the Republican Party hard to come into solidarity with its blue collar constituency and with its ethnic constituency of blacks and Latinos and Asians, the way Joe Biden is pushing his party to get into solidarity with the rank and file left, which is pretty darn conservative.
Well, I'll just end it with this. I think you're very optimistic about Biden, but I'm willing to watch and see what happens. And I do think that conservatives need to, take some notes from his playbook, because if he's reaching out to the blue collar voter, they know that is going to be a very important constituency right now, and we need to start doing the exact same outreach ourselves.
Brilliant, Rachel Alexander. Maybe the Republican National Committee be watching this show and following your guidance, and should they hire you as the next national chairman of the RNC. You've got my vote.
Not interested. I'd rather keep doing the show with you, Ralph.
And I love doing the show with you too, Rachel. So talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye now.